Mary Stuart was born on December 8, 1542 at Linlithgow Palace in Scotland. She was the daughter of King James V of Scotland and his second wife Marie de Guise. Her paternal grandmother was the English Princess Margaret Tudor, who was the eldest sister of Henry VIII, which is why Mary Stuart had a claim to the English throne. This fact, and especially her self-image as heiress to the English crown, was to make her the most dangerous opponent of Queen Elizabeth I. Mary's father, James V, was lying on his deathbed when the news reached him of the birth of his daughter. He died a few days after Mary's birth, at the age of 30. Mary, only 6 days old, was now Queen of Scotland. James Hamilton, the second Earl of Arran, next in line to the throne, became Regent of Scotland until 1554, when he was succeeded by the Queen Mother, Marie de Guise, who ruled until her death in 1560. In July 1543, 6 months after Mary's birth, it was agreed by treaty that Mary would be married to the future English King Edward VI, and that their heirs would rule a united England and Scotland. On September 9, 1543, Mary Stuart was formally crowned Queen of Scots at Stirling Castle. The treaty with England concerning Mary's marriage to Edward VI was dissolved by the Scottish Parliament at the end of 1543, a few weeks after Mary's coronation. Henry VIII had demanded that Scotland dissolve its alliance with France, which was refused. A war between Scotland and England ensued. By now, the new King of France, Henry II, proposed the union of Scotland with France by Mary marrying his firstborn son, François. On July 7, 1548, the marriage agreement was signed, and on August 7, 1548, the 5-year-old Mary Stuart was taken to France. On April 24, 1558, Mary Stuart married François, the Dauphin and heir to the French throne, during a magnificent wedding ceremony which took place in the Notre Dame Cathedral of Paris. In 1559, Mary's father-in-law, King Henry II, died during a jousting accident, and Mary's husband became François II of France. Sadly enough, the 15-year-old king was of weak health, and in November 1560, François became extremely ill, suffering from painful seizures. On December 5, 1560, the young king died. While his mother, Catherine de' Medici, spread the sad news of her son's death, Mary mourned the loss of her childhood friend, husband and king, and with his death, her title as queen consort. Charles IX replaced his brother as King of France. Catherine refused any attempts to marry Mary to the new King of France, and so it became clear to the young Dowager Queen that she was no longer welcome at the French court, and she decided to return to Scotland. The young widow set foot on Scottish soil on August 19, 1561. Despite her intelligence, Mary was not prepared for the dangerous and complex political situation Scotland found itself in. The Reformation was dividing the nation, and Mary, who was a devout Catholic, was received in Scotland with suspicion. The reformer John Knox publicly railed against her and her way of life. To the disappointment of the Catholics, however, Mary Stuart did not actively champion their cause. She tolerated the new Protestant majority and made her Protestant half-brother, James Stuart, her most important advisor. Elizabeth Tudor had become Queen of England in 1558 after the death of her younger half-brother, Edward VI, and her elder half-sister, Mary I. Her father, Henry VIII, had married her mother, Anne Boleyn, while his first wife, Catherine of Aragon, was still alive. The Catholic Church did not recognize Henry's divorce from Catherine, considered the marriage to Anne Boleyn invalid, and thus regarded Elizabeth as an illegitimate child. Illegitimate children were not entitled to inherit, however, which is why, from the Catholic point of view, the crown should pass to the descendants of Henry VIII's sister Margaret Tudor after Henry's legitimate descendants had died out. Accordingly, after the death of Mary I of England in 1558, Henri II of France had his daughter-in-law Mary Stuart proclaimed Queen of England. Many Catholics in England regarded Elizabeth as an illegitimate heir to the throne. They believed that Mary, as the legitimate great-granddaughter of Henry VII, rightfully belonged on the English throne. For this reason, the Catholic Mary was a constant threat to Elizabeth and her Protestant court. This was especially so after Pope Pius V excommunicated Elizabeth I in 1570 and called on the Catholic minority in England to get rid of the heretic on the throne in order to reinstate the old Catholic Church with the help of Mary Stuart. Mary often tried to resolve the tensions between herself and Elizabeth. So often Mary had called Elizabeth her sister in the hope of establishing a friendship with the Queen of England. In 1563, Elizabeth tried to neutralize Mary Stuart by proposing a marriage between Mary and Robert Dudley, the first Earl of Leicester, her own favourite and confidant. This proposal came to nothing, not in the least because Robert Dudley himself did everything he could to prevent the marriage project. In 1565, Mary fell in love with her 19-year-old Catholic cousin, Henry Stuart, Lord Darnley, the son of the Earl of Lennox, and married him on July 29, 1565, at Holyrood Palace. The marriage angered Elizabeth, as she felt that the marriage should only have taken place with her permission because Darnley was an English subject. Furthermore, the marriage posed a threat to Elizabeth because of Darnley's royal blood. A child from this marriage would have a justifiable claim to both the Scottish and the English throne. Mary's marriage to Darnley quickly became problematic. Darnley was not popular with the nobility. His behavior was not always considered mature, and some of his behaviors were of a sadistic nature. These behaviors were exacerbated by Darnley's drinking problem. Soon, Mary became pregnant, but Darnley suspected the child to be this of David Rizzio, the Queen's private secretary. Darnley's jealousy towards Rizzio eventually resulted in the murder of Rizzio by Darnley and his supporters. On June 19, 1566, James VI of Scotland and the later James I of England was born, which slightly improved the relationship between Mary and her husband. However, Darnley started pushing for more power and insisted on the right to rule as King of Scotland in case of Mary's death. As a result of a plot known as the Craig-Miller Bond, Darnley was murdered on the night of 9 to 10 February 1567. The bodies of both Darnley and his servant were found in the gardens of Kirk of Fields in Edinburgh. The house itself had been destroyed by a fire. Darnley was dressed in nightclothes, which suggested that he had left his bedroom in a hurry. Both bodies showed signs of strangulation. Suspicion fell on James Hepburn, the 4th Earl of Bothwell. Bothwell was probably already an advisor and knighted officer at the court of Mary from the moment she returned to Scotland. Bothwell was married to Jean Gordon, the daughter of George Gordon, the 4th Earl of Huntly. In early May 1567, Bothwell divorced Jean for adultery with a servant. Bothwell, although suspected from murdering Darnley, was acquitted. Only 12 days after Bothwell's divorce from his wife, on May 15, 1567, Mary and Bothwell married, allegedly after Bothwell had kidnapped and raped her. This Protestant marriage to a divorced man, who was suspected of murdering her second husband, made Mary unpopular and was one of the main reasons why she had to abdicate the throne. Mary signed the abdication in favour of her son on July 24, 1567. The boy, just over 1 year old, was crowned King James VI 5 days later in the Holyrood Church in Stirling, while Mary was imprisoned in Loch Leven Castle. Mary managed to escape Loch Leven Castle on May 2, 1568, barely 1 year after her capture, and reached out to Elizabeth for support to regain her throne. Although Elizabeth was not unwilling to help Mary gain back her Scottish throne, Mary still refused to formally renounce her claim to the English throne. Elizabeth thus remained doubtful whether she should lend assistance to Mary. First, Elizabeth wanted to have it settled whether Mary should be tried for the murder of Lord Darnley. Elizabeth ordered an inquest, which was politically influenced. Elizabeth wanted neither a conviction for murder nor an acquittal, as Mary was an anointed queen. Mary pleaded that she was a legitimate queen and therefore could not be convicted by any court. To incriminate Mary, her Scottish opponents presented the court with the so-called casket letters, 8 letters allegedly written by Mary to the Earl of Bothwell. Although the casket letters were found to be genuine after an examination of the handwriting and contents, the commission concluded that they could not be used to prove Lord Darnley's murder. This result was exactly what Elizabeth wanted. The authenticity of the casket letters is still disputed among historians today, since the originals were destroyed in 1584 and none of the existing copies form a complete set. Mary argued that it was not difficult to imitate her handwriting. In later centuries, it was suspected that the letters were complete forgeries. Also, the significance of these letters for the question of Mary's complicity in the murder of her husband Lord Darnley has been grossly overestimated. After the trial, Mary was imprisoned for a period of 18 years. Most of the time Mary was under the care of George Talbot, the 6th Earl of Shrewsbury, and his wife Bess of Hardwicke. Mary's third husband, the Earl of Bothwell, had been arrested in Norway and taken to Denmark, where he was incarcerated and succumbed to madness. He died in 1578. In 1570, Elizabeth was requested by the representatives of Charles IX of France to restore Mary to the Scottish throne. Elizabeth's precondition, however, remained Mary's agreement to renounce her claim to the English throne, something Mary still refused to do. Nevertheless, William Cecil continued to negotiate with Mary on Elizabeth's instructions. Elizabeth always avoided a personal meeting with Mary, which the latter always longed for. After the Ridolfi conspiracy in 1571, which was a plot to assassinate Queen Elizabeth I of England and replace her with Mary, at the Queen's instigation, Parliament passed a law excluding Mary from the English succession. Mary became an intolerable burden to Elizabeth as she became involved in more and more plots, as evidenced by her intercepted letters, and on October 25, 1586, Mary Stuart was found guilty of high treason for her part in the Babington plot, a planned attempt on the life of Elizabeth. A petition for Mary's immediate execution was presented to Elizabeth in Richmond on November 12, 1586, but it was not until February 1, 1587, that Elizabeth signed the execution warrant. On Wednesday, February 8, 1587, Mary Stuart was to be executed at 10 a.m. in the Great Hall of Fotheringhay Castle. Mary appeared at the execution site dressed in a black satin dress lined with black velvet. She wore 2 rosaries on her belt. A white veil covered her hair. When she removed the veil and dark overgarment at the scaffold, it was seen that she wore a dark red velvet petticoat and a dark red satin bodice underneath. The red color of her undergarments was probably deliberate. In European culture, red symbolized martyrdom, courage, and royal blood. The executioner was inexperienced and nervous. It took him 3 blows with the axe to separate Mary's head from her body. The first blow hit the back of her head. Since Mary showed no reaction, the first blow probably already caused unconsciousness or death. The second blow hit the neck but did not sever all the muscle strands. Only the third blow separated the head from the torso. Legend has it that after the executioner raised Mary Stuart's head by the hair to present it to the crowd. However, he grabbed the wig and her head, with short cropped grey hair, fell down and rolled onto the scaffold. Mary Stuart was first buried in Peterborough Cathedral on July 31, 1587. Her body was exhumed in September 1612, when her son, who as James I became King of England after the death of Elizabeth, ordered her to be buried in Westminster Abbey, where she now rests 9 meters from the grave of her nemesis Elizabeth I of England. Thank you for watching.